I was nothing more than a guard dog, working for the mafia, helping to protect their coca fields.
A certain dictator passed a law which made abortion illegal. The dictator was killed, but the orphans remained, born of his policies and abandoned by all.
The country we gave our lives for, the Soviet Union, no longer exists in this world.
Black Lagoon is a story of monsters. The anime presents us with literal terrorists, near-genocidal war maniacs, seemingly indestructible war machines, crazed vampire twins, and that's all just side characters before we mention the cold and callous gunwoman who provides most of the series' deaths. These people are all monsters, but the trick of Black Lagoon is making us understand their motivations, relate to their backstories, and why and how they accept the status they do. We've covered most of them, and sometimes their real history as well, but only individually. We have yet to connect the dots which bind these incarnations of evil together, and look not at why they are monsters, but why monsters exist in the first place. The best way to do this is to look at the contrasting characters, those who we witness make the all-important decision to either fall to or stand up against evil. And the most complete arc we have for that is none other than Yukio Washimine. The origins of Yukio's story are mundane compared to the rest of the cast, save Rock. Where most were coerced into taking up arms, she instead was given to taking up literature or helping at the local fair. The daughter of a Yakuza boss, she was related to the darkness but was never beholden to it herself, instead living as any average student would. Her friend Maki is likely an intentional highlight for this. She complains about mundane and average problems that have never plagued this cast before, exactly because they are problems of an average life. Really, it's hard to even describe Yukio's life before Balalaika's interference, because there's nothing much to be said about it, much like with Rock. It's less of a concrete existence and more of a feeling like simplicity and calm, even when unwanted. But within that, she reveals some desire for change, much like our leading man saying to her friend,
I guess I like any book that takes me away and makes me feel like I'm lost out at sea, endlessly expanding, yet somewhat different from reality, an escape.
But there's also a caution in this kind of wishing, one which suggests she's aware of how close to the criminal life she was born while still being outside of it. She speaks to the opposite side of things, saying,
I don't like the night. There's something about it. I'm afraid of being swallowed by the darkness.
In a not-so-subtle act of foreshadowing. As we're learning these small snippets of her character and seeing her simple meet-cute with Rock, the opposite end of the arc is playing out in all its bloody fashion. Balalaika is delighting in a growing war, massacring her foes with a reckless abandon that shocks those who brought her here. Chaka is beating Rock while hurling slurs as Revy watches, knowing she can't escalate the situation. It's a war of monsters, but instead of massive beasts, you simply have demons in human skin. Yukio is contrasted against this darkness because it's something she should have never touched. It wasn't the direction that the life of an average girl like her goes in. To go from listening to complaints about final grades and part-time jobs to ordering murder is near unthinkable. But that's Evil's trick. In that way, she's somewhat right in calling Rock out on his motivations for saving her later. She is the life he left behind, plain and simple. Whether he knew it or not, she represents it fairly well. But just like him, the darkness found its way to her. For Rock, it was a small thread which connected him to his boss, and that was used to tug him to the gates of the underworld. For Yukio, it was her birthright, a name, nothing more. The Kosa Council, the group strangling the Washimine clan, behind the scenes holds steadfast to their rule that only a blood relative can succeed her father, leaving her as the only option. It's a made-up rule, and it makes that name, those few characters which pair with Yukio, the thread that pulls her in the same as Rock. It's not a grand action, not an announcement to the world, but instead the careful tug of things that can't be helped. The manipulation of bonds, the bastardization of blood, and the theft of survival. What's most striking to me about their stories is how thin and fragile those threads are, but how much they're able to pull with them. How they can ruin entire lives and create monsters where humans once stood. The real extent of this coercion, though, comes from the stakes of a choice. Will Yukio become the head of the Washimine clan or not? If she leaves the family behind with no head, it will be dissolved and swallowed up in a brutal fashion. but if she accepts the position, it can be used to save them. As she later does, they're ordered underground, waiting for the signal to emerge once more, a signal that would never come. She describes the choice as such.
So if I choose to walk a path in the sun, the rest of you will be forced to wander in the darkness.
She can either save her own life, but then live it knowing she refused to help so many others, or dive into the underworld and lift them all up. This is what I really love about her story and what feels so accurate to real life in it. Whatever Rock and Genji may believe, she did have a choice in the matter. It's just that the choice was awful, the exact kind of forced binary situation which manipulates a kind person into a monster because they can't stand to sit back and live with someone else's life slipping through their fingers. Yukio doesn't know most of the people she saves, but she's kind and caring to them, a stark contrast to every other boss we see in the series. It's the actions of a saint saving all these strangers morphed into the death of a sinner. The underworld's trick in creating monsters isn't by forcing them in without a choice, but rather giving them a choice with one option they could never stomach and consequences that they could never perceive, by forcing them to justify not someone else's evil actions, but their own. This quote is important,
but you don't have to say it, I know. It's an outdated custom that no one's bothered to change, but those are the rules we must live by, whether we like it or not.
Yukio, unlike most, is able to recognize exactly how she's being manipulated, but she accepts the responsibility and consequences just the same. They forced her hands to be bloodied in one way or another, so she decided it was better to at least gain something from it if it had to happen either way. And that's the start of a monster, the recognition that evil can lead to gain, like those who craft them from behind the scenes. Rock can reject her justification because he isn't the one who has to stomach it. The Washimine clan means nothing to him, just her, so he wants to believe the option where she lives is the best. But she puts it best in saying,
If I don't believe that I chose this, I can't have resolve. Then of course I'm gonna fight for them. What kind of person wouldn't do that?
this is a noble motivation, the words of a hero who can't make themselves turn their back on someone in need. But it creates something much different from it, a woman who begins to enjoy the thrills of bank robbery and dreams of love in the city of the dead. Genuinely heroic motivation was turned into this.
I thought I was done with kissing ass for a living, but here I am at the ends of the earth, and now I'm supposed to be kissing your ass? What kind of sick joke is this?
Father was a good man. He didn't do anything bad. So why? Why would God do this?
But if I'd been standing here sooner, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
And the manipulation isn't something that's unique to her. With an episode titled Two Fathers, Little Soldier Girls, it's not a secret that Balalaika and Yukio are supposed to have some parallels. And one of them is this underhanded use of family bonds to pull them in. Balalaika was similarly privileged, the daughter of a seemingly wealthy or influential family with a grandfather who ranked highly in the military. Like Yukio, she's also forced to take her father's place in a way, told that she could win back his honor by competing and winning in the Olympic Games. Naturally, before that though, she has to train for marksmanship, and she does on the battlefield in Afghanistan, fighting a losing war which helped cause the death of the nation she fought for. This choice was similar, to live a comfortable life with the guilt of not saving her father and being shunned for rebuking her duty to the Union, or put in her time and accomplish a promised grand ambition. And it was morphed into a life-consuming beast. Again, from behind the scenes, darkness grew and took hold. The mismanagement of the Soviet Union turned her service into a death sentence, a return to a country which rejected her and then let out its final death cry. Her evil was honed on the battlefield but solidified in the slow, meandering actions of old men who fucked with the lives of entire nations for their own good. It was evil bred in the shadows. Like Yukio, it was the abuse of tradition and cultural norms from the very people who made those things normal. The same men who turned Balalaika into a butcher for the sake of her father's honor were the ones who decided honor was important. She was their potential gain, gotten by crafted rules and standards others had to follow while they skirted around them, until eventually she leaned into them, took her role for her own gain since she was locked into it anyway. Forced to justify their own actions, however well intended, monsters grow darker because why wouldn't they? If you have to live a life that can be cut short at any moment, one you hate, why not make the best of it with what you have, take what you can get, and lean into the role? It's like how Balalaika becomes one of the sources of evil for Yukio completing the pattern. While they may be understandable demons, it doesn't change the fact that they're still murderers out for their own gain, eventually. We can find a similar situation with most of the characters. Roberta was lied to, believing she was fighting for justice when in reality, she was being used to defend the drug trade. Her choice was to either witness the destruction of the only home she'd ever known, or take up arms and fight for it. Then, as always, that well-intentioned decision was morphed into something monstrous. Evil has an advantage in conflict because it doesn't hold itself to any standard. So to fight it, her side resorted to some of these same evils, only with the idea that one day it could bring justice. That day was always pushed further and further back, along with Roberta's humanity, until it was too late. The twins had their lives stolen away from their very first breaths at the hands of Ceausescu, whose policies forced their birth and then their abandonment. With the absolute hell they endured, there was one very clear choice: kill or be killed. They never witnessed anything else because of the decision made by a man sitting in an almost literal ivory tower. Revy is the product of a society which turned its back on its citizens, leaving them to rot in abusive households. She could either keep praying and try to be a good person, suffering the entire time in ways no one ever should have to, or fight back. For her, evil was simplicity. She could assume that everything was for a reason, and that things would get better, and that eventually the corrupt cops would be removed, and that policy changes would uplift her status, and even more, or simply use what she'd observed, that money and power stopped suffering. The thread which ties these stories together isn't violence, that's just the byproduct. The thread is manipulation, complacency, rotten politics, awful leaders. The root of evil doesn't have to happen out in the open. Most of the time, it brews right under our noses in those ways. It's a poor girl sitting on the street, twins in an orphanage just down the road, a friend who's gone more silent than usual, or a soldier who's being lied to. It's just that once we turn to finally look and finally notice, it's making a much larger scene. It's presented in decisions which hide their true nature and consequence, the will of someone with a vested interest. Now, there is another class of monsters in Black Lagoon. Evil as a choice doesn't always have to be so forced. The series is full of characters who, under no duress or manipulation, made the decision to become monsters. While this could be any number of them, to stick closer to Yukio's story, let's look at Chaka, one of the most detestable characters of the anime. We get no backstory for him, and I think that's intentional because his story wouldn't make his evil any more understandable as it has for others. He wasn't someone with a shitty life who took up power in the name of a greater goal, he did it for the sake of power itself. He's simply a man who gets off on holding something over others, on controlling situations, and determining the lives of other people. He brags about his kill count because it's a supposed marker of importance. If so many lives end at his point, then he must be something of value. Whether he thinks about it that way or not, it's weakness and nothing more. When Revy deduces that he kidnaps Yukio by his weapon choice, this is all made clear.
Any idiot using a gun like this has got to be some show-off wannabe who's beyond all salvation.
Revy, as someone coerced into evil, has it in her nature to recognize the underworld's choice. There was no force that pushed Chaka into this life, but there is one that allows him to live it. The Washimine clan under the boots of the Kosa Council was growing weaker. They couldn't allow themselves to lose members, even if they were headache-inducing idiots who needed to be constantly reprimanded because they were weakening. He is protected by the same things which destroyed Yukio's life. The policies which forced her to be there and forced the clan to be weak are the same ones that forced them to need him and thus sustain him. And then the war the Washimine clan and others caused is what put a target on Yukio's back to be kidnapped, giving him a reason to do something so vile. Without these actors behind the scenes causing manipulation for their own gain, that is, creating situations of inequality, there wouldn't be anything for Chaka to take advantage of for his own pleasure or profit. While he may not be a monster made in the same way, he's one who subsists on these same measures. You can extend this to most of the other minor villains as well. The captain from the first episodes is only able to hunt humans as he does because others pay him to do so. Mr. Chin from episode 3 is seeking to steal someone else's power and profit, an act which wouldn't be possible if such things weren't hoarded under a select few names. The Nazis are allowed to play dress up as soldiers because of a bigoted old man who has enough money to throw such things at them as a test, and it goes on from there, a byproduct of the good being dragged down. I don't think there's an answer to if humans are naturally evil or not. We're too far along to ever say. But what is clear is that these same situations provide evidence for both cases simultaneously, and at least that gives us a closer look at the source of evil in this story.
I'm right here where I'm sitting, Revy. I'm not anywhere else.
You can say those things because you've always remained in the twilight. You've never had to choose.
You've been standing in the twilight this whole time. So why did you join the rest of us in the darkness?
I think it's now fitting to talk about Rock once more. Like Yukio, he's attempting to use evil for something good after being coerced down the path of a monster. He fails again and again to save others from Roanapur, the greatest one being Yukio herself. He finally accepted that purity couldn't achieve his goals and was willing to sacrifice a mass of monsters to try and prevent one single girl from becoming one. He wanted to remove the choice, but it leads to nothing. Unknown to him, the Washimine clan, which he asked to be destroyed by Balalaika, was already ordered underground, effectively disbanded. The murders which he took responsibility for had no point, except to benefit Balalaika and force him deeper into the underworld. Just more of what we've already discussed, and that way it succeeded. The rock we see in Blood Trail is a new beast, one who learned the lesson we covered here today. He feels Chang attempting to do the same thing Balalaika did, that behind-the-scenes manipulation for their own benefit, and decided he would beat them at their own game. With the intention both to save individuals and for revenge, he launches into his master plan to destroy Roanapur. And everything goes exactly how he planned, but leads to no change. The city of the dead remains in stasis as it always had and always will. And the reason for this is nothing other than the evil that we've just covered. Chang, with the help of his mysterious benefactor Eda, wins the war. An undercover agent for the CIA, what prevents Rock from destroying this dumping ground of monsters is the shady influence of an organization acting in ways unbeknownst to most. Roanapur is profitable for them. The drug trade, collected and organized in the city, is something they can control and profit from. I called Roanapur the dumping ground of monsters because it's just that, the place where they're collected so their lives can benefit this shady influence. Rock's plan is to turn the public eye on Roanapur, leading to an outrage and subsequent action that would regulate it out of existence. But because of Eda and her organization, it's kept out of sight and remains only to those who want to be aware of it. This is pretty much the definition of manipulation, of dark dealings and back rooms which turn others to evil. Like everything else, Roanapur is a choice, an active decision to ruin the lives of others for the benefit of a few. It isn't the villain of the story, but rather what the villain of the story wants. There are layers of evil in Black Lagoon. The death and destruction we witness is part of it, but more so they're the consequences of a higher level. The true villain of Black Lagoon isn't a person, but rather a kind of person, the archetype of someone who uses others. It's men in suits who don't take up arms themselves, but create these situations where others are forced to. It's those who can go home to normal and happy lives and families who are unaware of how much desolation is left in their wake. It's the faceless ones who turn a blind eye to the suffering they're paid to try and prevent. It's creatures who bake inequality into the fabric of their societies and then use those very inequalities for their own benefit. Those who set traditions which become norms only ever to be used to force the hands of others. The villain of Black Lagoon is not a tragic tale, but a disgusting one, a feeling caught between two worlds, one hand in the fleece of the dark and another in the light of the day. The evil of the story is Rock's twilight. For all the good that Rock may have intended to come from his master plan, it was the same kind of thing which creates evil. He enacted it from behind the curtain, a man in a suit watching the action unfold and speaking to how much profit he's going to get from him and how much his friends will do as well. He didn't take up arms himself, but literally placed them in someone else's hands. He gave Garcia the gun, and Garcia ended up taking the bullet too. Rock sits and watches the sunrise after others suffered through the night because of his actions. And with this in mind, we have to question how well-intentioned his plan really was. Destroying Roanapur would hurt Balalaika and Chang and the other mafia heads who are truly pretty much evil and did so much damage to his life and the others he tried to save. But it would also create utter chaos. Every citizen would be caught in the final struggle as those with power fled with everything they could, leaving the rest to perish. Monsters would spill out into the world to peddle their evil elsewhere, having taken everything they could from the city of the dead. And wasn't it really all just for revenge on the people who hurt him anyway? I have to come back to Garcia because Rock's plan relies on treating him exactly how Yukio and the others were treated. His choice is to save Roberta, the last of his family and someone he loves, or live alone with the guilt of having let her die in the gutter. And that decision is reached by Rock carefully plotting the situation that leads them to the jungle. He gets Garcia exactly where he needs to be to make that choice in a way the boy recognizes but can do nothing about now that it's happened. Under the pretense of helping, Rock was really forcing him to take a bullet that easily could have ended his life. When he returns alive, Rock simply says,
This really was the best case scenario. Way to go, Garcia.
Meaning there were other options to reach the result he wanted. Survival wasn't guaranteed, and as he continues,
Thanks to you, I actually managed to do some good and save someone.
But then, is that really Rock's good or Garcia's? Shouldn't the credit go not to the one who provided the weapon of destruction, but the one who took the full force of it? Garcia is the anti-Rock, having a flipped motivation. Rather than seeking something selfish with the added benefit of helping others, he seeks to help first and at a scale he knows to be possible, and then to fulfill his own desire. He wants to save Roberta, and then, once he has, live the life he wishes with her. And he takes the risk onto himself. Like we said, he recognizes what's happening, but proceeds with it anyway. He doesn't force the Americans to go along with his desire, but instead aligns it with theirs so they can work together. And while he does pose some risk to them, he never asks them to stand before Roberta's gun, only his with blanks. And he willingly places himself at the center and pays the cost, similarly to Yukio's method of salvation. But where he differs is maintaining his strong will and not caving to the ease of taking from others where she did. Like we discussed in the last video, he holds power for a moment, uses it how he needs, and then discards it rather than hoarding it for himself. In that act, he prevents himself from becoming a part of that creeping darkness that emits its way into the lives of all monsters one way or another, forced decision or not. One of the keys to understanding all of this is that forced scarcity is a tenet of monsters. The wars that ruined Roberta's life were fought because wealth was hoarded to a select few who pillaged her country and its citizens. Revy is the product of a society that did the same, only in a way they like to call civilized. And the twins, to an extreme degree, are another case of this. They could have received the care they needed, but from mismanagement, what could have been ample was made scarce. It doesn't have to simply be commodities, it can be ideas. For Balalaika and Yukio, two decently privileged girls, it was honor and salvation respectively, concepts which we ourselves created simply to be scarce. And for Rock, it was a good life, something which could be plentiful, but instead is held behind the idea that such things depend on endless worker bees. The evil force we mentioned, the true villain of the story, has many forms. It's this man right here, and this one too. It's somewhere lurking in the history of these photographs. It's in the people who profited from these fields, and those who decided a place like this was humane for two children. It goes by many names. It's war, or honor, or greed. It's the idea that we have to take from others when we have enough to give everyone what they need. The idea that some deserve more than others from their birthright. The idea that most exist simply for the benefit of some. All of these things are baked into most of our cultures, simply taken to the extreme in Roanapur. The evil of this story is pervasive, found in every corner of life that we all experience. It preys on those who have less, but takes pleasure in destroying anyone and everyone, as long as it profits someone, somewhere. Is it an accident that what scares Dutch the most about Rock is when he says,
When all this mayhem finally comes to an end, we can make a real killing here.
That seemingly mundane line speaks volumes to this pillar of indifference for a reason. Dutch is really the observer of Roanapur, of this dead city, serving any and all with little concern for morality as long as he gets paid. He knows better than anyone else what a fall from grace, what being swallowed whole by darkness looks like. And when he saw it for Rock, the name of evil was greed. That, my friends, those dark and creeping, normalized and mundane feelings like greed, which we look at as simple facts of the world, those feelings are the true villain of Black Lagoon's story and many of our own. If you want to take something important from this story, that is it. Don't settle for feeling the world was evil, because that belief is what allows humans to become monsters unnoticed. Anyway, I wish there was more I could add to the end of this topic, because I don't like for things to end on the note simply of awareness and not to have a hopeful message at the end of things. But with Black Lagoon kind of sitting in stasis, at least in terms of the anime, I wouldn't like to put a cap on this video that ends up being something against what the creator of the series and everything that's written to it ends up being. So this video is going to have to stay on that note simply of awareness. And then I guess the goal for us is to figure out how to solve the problem from there, for lack of a better word, because I'm way off script at this point. The teleprompter ended a long time ago. So I'll stop rambling. I think that pretty much covered everything we had to, and I'll just leave you with some important links in the pinned comment. Twitter to stay up to date and get random thoughts, Twitch for usually Thursday nights and Saturday evenings for different variety streams, my Discord where we have some community things going on, and I cracked all my knuckles doing that. I'm sorry if that freaks you out. And most importantly, my Patreon, where you can get your name at the end of videos like these amazing people here. And once we get to 10 supporters, we'll have you guys vote on some additional benefits and things to get going over there as well. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.